Overcome the fear of displacement. Buddhist wisdom for rest. You are lying awake in a room that feels more like a temporary landing pad than a true sanctuary. Your chest holding that specific, hollow exhaustion that comes from constantly moving between different cities, new apartments, or changing jobs. Right now, your inner sense of security is likely floating somewhere in the air, disconnected from the floorboards beneath you, because your history has been scattered across so many temporary coordinates. You are mourning the quiet loss of a stable home base, feeling the heavy ache of always being the new person who must adapt to a fresh set of faces, names, and expectations. The air around your bed is cool, holding the faint, clean scent of dry cedar wood shavings and the steady murmur of a distant wind moving through the valley trees. The mattress beneath you is a firm, unmoving support, offering a physical anchor that requires absolutely no performance from your tired spine or your aching joints. Your hands are resting loosely at your sides, perhaps feeling heavy with the unique loneliness of a life that has been unpacked too many times. The inner core of your being is not fractured or broken simply because you feel so rootless tonight. The disjointed sensation you are navigating is not a flaw in your psychology, but the natural tiredness of a spirit that has spent all its energy adjusting its branches to fit into shifting soils. Tonight, there is no requirement for you to build a new foundation, and there is no obligation to decide where you will permanently plant yourself before the morning arrives. We are not here to force a sudden, artificial sense of belonging over your loneliness, nor are we here to demand that you pretend this transient lifestyle has been easy for your heart. The mind often assumes that true stability requires an unchanging external landscape, believing we can only find peace when our environment becomes a permanent circle of absolute predictability. Yet this desperate effort to make the temporary world stand still is the very thing that turns our transitions into a source of chronic internal fragmentation. This is the surprising insight that Buddhist wisdom offers to a displaced mind. The real displacement we experience does not live within the physical changing of our zip codes, but in our internal refusal to look at the unmoving ground that exists beneath every floorboard we ever cross. We spend our vitality trying to anchor ourselves to the surface leaves of our experiences, completely unaware that our true center functions like an ancient mountain oak whose taproot drives vertically down into the bedrock, entirely independent of the shifting weather above. Perhaps you have felt this specific sorrow too, during the long hours when the rest of the world has closed its doors. It is a unique kind of displacement, this feeling that you are a permanent traveler who belongs to no particular soil. If it feels right, let the back of your skull sink deeper into the support below, allowing your shoulder blades to widen and settle into their own natural density. You do not have to pack your bags or sort through the pieces of your history tonight. And there is no obligation to settle your long-term plans before the sun rises. The darkness does not require you to force your roots into an unfamiliar soil to prove you are safe. It is completely permitted for your awareness to stop managing the logistics of your life, allowing your immediate presence to drop its anchor right through the floorboards into the deep, silent bedrock of the night. In a short while, we will travel up to a high planting clearing, where an old forester demonstrates how a young tree finds its true stability, not by clinging to the surface dirt, but by driving its core strength straight down through the frost line. For now, let these spoken cadences exist as simple markers along the perimeter of your room, asking nothing from your intellect but the freedom to let the weights settle naturally into the earth. Right now, your body is simply breathing in the dark, and that is fully enough to establish your place in the night. The mind may continue to trace the geographical loops of your past transitions, but the lungs are only interested in the air that is currently available in this specific square of space. Each inhalation is a fresh arrival, a clean drop of vitality that does not ask how long you intend to stay in this room, or what title you will hold next year. You might notice how the breath does not hesitate when it enters your chest, never wondering if it should have chosen a more permanent home or a less fragmented life. It simply performs its silent work, warming the center of your frame, and then leaving without a single trace of regret. If it feels right, Let your attention drift toward the slow, natural pause that occurs at the very end of your next exhalation. In that brief interval, before the air returns, there is a total absence of movement, a small clearing where no boxes are being packed and no identities are being defended. You do not need to leap across that gap to secure the next moment, for the next moment will arrive on its own momentum. Just as the mountain trees continue to draw nutrients from the deep earth without your conscious assistance, the transient self that is tired of starting over is not the only reality in this room. Only this real breathing form is present, and only this form is worthy of the rest that the darkness is offering. Perhaps you can allow the weight of your thoughts to match the slow, downward pull of the valley gravity. There is no need to resolve the mystery of where you truly belong, and there is no obligation to fix the timeline before you are permitted to sleep. The ancient oak does not apologize to the forest for the branches it lost in the move, as it simply continues to push its core strength deeper into the stone. Let your awareness slide into that same quiet permission, leaving the temporary landscapes to fade into the shadow, while you remain securely anchored in the stillness of this frame. The shifting landscape of a life spent in transit can be found written in the dust of the high passes, where the horizon changes with every single sunset. Far up the rocky eastern slopes, away from the settled towns where families lived in the same valley for generations, lay a vast, windswept clearing used for mountain forestry. The air here was constantly cold, smelling sharply of wet pine needles, exposed shale, and the deep, silent frost that clung to the dark earth until midday. A young courier named Ren had spent several years running messages across the provinces, never staying in one town for more than a few weeks. He carried a persistent, hollow fatigue in his center, a floating sensation that made him feel like a leaf detached from its twig, drifting without any actual destination. He could not stop counting the number of homes he had left behind, his mind constantly comparing the different rooms, the unfamiliar streets, and the loneliness of always arriving as a total stranger. Every time he unpacked his small canvas bundle in a new trailside lodging, he felt a wave of internal fragmentation, believing that this transient existence had robbed him of the ability to belong anywhere at all. Deep within this high-altitude clearing, where the low morning light crept slowly across the frost-covered grass, lived an elderly mountain forester named Mazur Gyo. Gyo was a person who moved with immense deliberation, his face deeply lined like the bark of an old cedar, his fingers rough and split from working in the cold soil. He did not participate in the bustling trade of the lower markets, as he was solely responsible for planting young oak saplings along the steep, eroded slopes to prevent the spring rains from washing the mountainside away. When the early spring winds began to howl through the rocky defiles, Yuo would stand in the center of the clearing, holding his primary meditation anchor. This was a heavy bronze dibble bar, a thick metal rod with a pointed, wedge-shaped tip that had grown entirely smooth and bright from decades of being driven into the stubborn bedrock. Rin sat down on a smooth piece of granite, watching the old forester prepare the ground for a tiny, vulnerable oak sapling that had been brought up from the low nurseries. The young courier expected the master to seek out the softest, deepest pockets of topsoil, since the wind on the ridge was brutal and the topsoil was thin, sandy, and easily disturbed. Instead, Go raised the heavy bronze tool with both hands, bringing the pointed tip down with a dull, echoing thud directly onto a patch of hard, gray shale. He did not look for a convenient hollow, and he did not complain about the unyielding quality of the mountain surface. He repeated the motion, driving the bronze bar deeper into the hidden fractures of the stone, turning the heavy metal tool to widen the narrow, vertical channel. The young traveler stood up, his leather boots crunching slightly against the frozen gravel, approaching the old man to peer down into the dark, narrow opening. He watched the forester place the delicate roots of the oak sapling straight down into the deep, rocky crevice, packing small fragments of granite and damp loam around the base to lock it into place. Rin asked the master how a tree could possibly survive in a spot that felt so inhospitable and cold, noting that the topsoil was far too shallow to provide a comfortable home. He wondered if it would not be wiser to move the tree down to the sheltered valley, rather than forcing it to struggle against the constant gales on this exposed ridge. Geo did not drop his tool, nor did he look away from the small green stem. He rested the heavy bronze bar upright against his thigh, his calloused hands resting on the smooth metal handle. Letting his own weight settle into the earth, he spoke into the clear morning air, his voice steady and low, matching the deep thud of the tool against the stone. He said that a tree does not find its home in the shallow topsoil that shifts with every seasonal storm, and its survival does not depend on the comfort of the weather. He explained that the oak survives because it drives its core taproot straight down through the fractures, locking its strength directly into the unmoving bedrock far beneath the frost line. The true danger to the tree happens only when it tries to hold onto the blowing dust, forgetting that the stone underneath the mountain is the exact same stone that supports the entire valley below. Ren looked down at the tiny sapling, watching the small green leaves tremble in the fierce ridge wind, while the base remained perfectly unmoving. A sudden, quiet clarity entered his chest, cutting through the exhausting loops of his geographical memories. He saw that he had been treating his own peace like a handful of loose topsoil, believing he could only belong if the external landscape remained completely soft and static. The fatigue he carried was not a sign that his life was ruined, but the friction of his mind, trying to anchor itself to the temporary rooms, instead of driving his presence straight down into the underlying suchness of the moment. The old forester lifted the heavy bronze bar once more, moving to the next patch of stone, allowing the metal to find the hidden seams of the mountain in the early light. He noted that a person who knows how to anchor their awareness in the unmoving ground can cross 100 provinces without ever losing their true center, for the bedrock never changes its nature. But the young traveler had yet to learn how an unhurried hearth can turn a sudden mountain blizzard into a place of absolute inner stillness. Right now, as you listen to the rhythmic thud of the bronze bar in that story, you can allow the transient coordinates of your own past to rest exactly as they are. You do not need to build a permanent house tonight to deserve the safety of this room. The transitions you experienced were real, and the loneliness they left behind is a natural weight on a tired spirit. But your awareness is fully capable of holding the movement without falling into pieces. If it feels right, let your breath move smoothly through the center of your frame, honoring the physical body without asking it to resolve every geographical question before the morning arrives. The space around your bed is completely unconcerned with the cities you left behind last year. The walls are quiet, the darkness is steady, and your breathing form is perfectly complete without the illusion of an unchanging environment. You might notice how the night does not demand that you present a permanent address, offering the exact same quiet shelter to your transient heart as it does to the mountains outside. There is no requirement to settle your long-term path before you are permitted to let your eyes close, for the current hour is only interested in the weight that is currently sinking into the bed. Let the loops of the past fade into the shadow, leaving you with the simple, heavy reality of this immediate rest. This vision of the young sapling driving its core strength down into the mountain stone is not an invitation to turn your heart into a cold, unfeeling surface. It does not look to transform you into an isolated rock, completely disconnected from the warmth of human homes or the natural desire for a stable perimeter. The wisdom found in the architecture of deep roots points toward a completely different kind of emotional freedom. The primary difficulty we experience in our transitions is often just the initial movement of a real-life journey, a simple realization that our outer settings have altered their shape. The true exhaustion begins when we try to force the temporary topsoil to stay perfectly still by our own will, creating an internal strain that warps our entire sense of security. The core suffering does not reside within the fact that your physical address changed, but rather in our internal insistence that we must find a permanent external anchor to prove our value. We layer a heavy weight of constant comparison over our natural adaptability, causing our individual structure to tremble under a load it was never meant to hold. When we discuss attachment in the stillness of this evening, we are describing that specific mental reflex that demands we find our identity only in the unchanging permanence of our surrounding rooms. It is the tight, heavy sensation in your chest that insists you cannot be personally safe until every piece of furniture and every social circle remains completely static. Craving becomes that desperate Latinite urge to turn every temporary landing place into a final destination, treating a normal period of transition as a dangerous sign of absolute isolation. We believe that if we can just lock down the surface conditions, the structural bond of our life will remain secure. Buddhist insight gently reminds us that forcing separate environments to act as permanent homes without recognizing the fluid nature of reality always results in a fragile existence. True harmony relies on the independent depth of your own internal ground, resting securely within its own space. Mindfulness is simply the capacity to stand firmly on your own bedrock without automatically reaching out to grasp the passing dust of the past provinces. It is the quiet act of observing a new apartment or an unfamiliar city without deciding that you must immediately alter your identity to absorb it. When we notice that all physical landscapes are inherently impermanent and constantly shifting, we realize that the movements of our life are not dangerous, hostile forces. They are merely passing weather patterns, sustained only because we refuse to allow the bronze bar to find the deeper stone. Letting go does not mean you abandon your care for the places you inhabit or stop opening your heart to new communities. It means you finally recognize that leaving a healthy distance between your true well-being and your physical coordinates is the only way to keep the structure standing. Awareness functions as the wide mountain sky that holds the high clearing without being compressed by the weight of the timber or the movement of the gales. It is the vast space within you that can feel the loneliness of another new start, yet recognizes that the transition does not dictate the physical reality of your own value. Compassion is the willingness to look at your own tiredness without wanting to punish your frame for feeling unsettled in a strange room. It is the understanding that you cannot truly establish a deep connection if your own center has been completely turned to dust by the constant pressure to fit in instantly. The old forester did not reject the sapling for having shallow roots upon its arrival. He simply respected its nature enough to give it room to drive its strength down into the stone. When this realization settles into the breath, the way you sit within your own skin changes fundamentally, introducing an unshakable sort of safety. The mind stops acting as a desperate packer trying to secure every temporary room with the fragile glue of social validation. You begin to see that the darkness outside your window does not require you to justify the path that brought you to this bed. The night is simply vast, quiet, and completely unconcerned with the permanent locations you have been trying so hard to manufacture since dawn. The weight of the original move was a singular event, a passing change that shifted your body across the map and left its mark on the calendar. Yet the mind continues to drag the heavy memory over the same cold space, thinking that if it reviews the logistics enough times, it can melt the sense of rootlessness away. This constant internal friction is where the second layer of pain takes root, transforming a momentary transition into a permanent condition of survival. The teachings invite you to lift the heavy analysis from the path, allowing the warmth of your own presence to soothe the margins of your change without demanding immediate permanence. You are allowed to carry the history of your moves without allowing it to dictate the volume of your breathing tonight. As the quietness of the hour deepens, the urge to defend your timeline begins to lose its grip on the chest. You can feel the natural stability of the body returning, a solid alignment that has nothing to do with the permanent houses or the long-term careers that are absent from this room. The darkness around your bed is not waiting for a final decision, and it does not keep a ledger of the cities you failed to stay in. It simply offers an open space where the pieces of your journey can settle onto the earth, leaving your awareness free to rest in the baseline of this immediate reality. If it feels right, allow the heavy architecture of your shoulders to drop downward toward the support underneath you, giving up the rigid stance you maintained throughout the daylight hours. You might bring your awareness to the clear, rhythmic passage of the mountain air as it enters the body, moving naturally without any deliberate steering from your mind. There is no requirement to strain or to regulate the depth of this inhalation. as the mere act of observing its current cadence is fully sufficient. Perhaps you can trace the cool, clean sensation at the back of the throat, followed by a softer, warmer release that returns quietly to the surrounding room. With each unhurried exhalation, you can invite the muscles of the jaw and the lower back to unburden themselves, letting the features of the body become spacious and completely unjoined. As you sit within this clear perimeter, a specific memory of a past province or a temporary room may present itself to your thoughts, seeking to occupy your internal space. Do not fight the presence of this memory, and do not attempt to construct a defense against it. Instead, you might gently give this internal pattern a simple title, perhaps calling it the transient loop or the floating leaf. Observe how this mental movement creates a subtle tightness across the chest, a physical impression that feels like a heavy weight pressing down on an unanchored frame. If it feels comfortable, imagine translating this precise worry into the form of a heavy bronze dibble bar, letting the solid metal frame hold the entire weight of that geographical grievance. You do not need to move the bar, and you do not need to force it into the earth. Simply see this individual piece of dark metal resting firmly on the heavy timber table within your awareness, remaining completely distinct from the landscape around it. Watch what happens to the internal image when you step back by a small measure, allowing a narrow gap of clear sky to open around the perimeter of the smooth handle. The bronze bar does not need to vanish from your vision, for it is entirely permitted to remain there, catching the pale mountain mist without pressing against your ribs. You can return to this spacious pasture whenever you are ready, but right now, your only role is to serve as the silent space that allows these elements to remain separate. There is no urgency to force a profound emotional transformation, or to clear every lingering sense of rootlessness before the hour ends. The weight of everyone else's permanent foundations is allowed to sit outside your perimeter tonight, leaving your physical frame unburdened and your breath completely your own. As the borders of this internal landscape clarify, we follow the path down into the lower valleys where the art of presence takes on an even subtler form. Right now, your body is simply matching the natural drop of the rain as it finds its place in the soil below the hill. There is no need to mend the entire network of your past addresses before you are allowed to rest, and there is no obligation to fix the timeline to earn the comfort of the dark. You might notice how the mattress receives your weight without asking which transitions brought you to this room, offering the exact same steady foundation to your body, regardless of your historical movements. Even noticing the rise of a single thought is enough to begin the softening, letting the sharp fragments lose their edge in the darkness. Perhaps you can allow the remaining tension in your hands to release, letting the fingers curl naturally against the fabric of the bed. You are no longer holding the handles of the heavy tools, and you are no longer responsible for maintaining the defense of your history against those who are absent. The night has taken over the management of the valley, covering the terraced fields and the high clearing in a blanket of absolute stillness. Let your awareness slide into that same quiet sanctuary, trusting the immediate current of your breath to carry you softly into the deep spaces of the night. Down in the lower gap of the range, where the pack trails intersected near a cold stone shelter, the air always carried the thick scent of smoldering pine roots, iron rust, and the damp wool of resting travelers. A wandering trader named Saki spent her long seasons moving between the border outposts, her bones often aching from the continuous vibration of the rough cart tracks. Saki lived with a profound, quiet resentment that made her breath catch whenever the evening shadows began to lengthen over an unfamiliar clearing. Years of endless relocation had left her feeling completely hollowed out, as if her personal history had been ground into fine dust by the wheels of her own trade wagon. She felt an intense bitterness toward the settled families, who could trace their lineages to the roots of a single orchard, believing her own transient path had made her permanently disconnected from the human circle. Every night, while the mountain winds began to whistle through the cracks of a new stone wall, she lay awake counting the keys to storage rooms she no longer owned, scanning the dark for a permanence she could never seem to purchase. The keeper of the trailside hearth was an ancient cook named Sister Chiyo. Chiyo was a woman who worked in total simplicity, her back slightly curved by a lifetime of lifting iron cauldrons, her skin dark and polished like a river walnut. She did not travel beyond the high perimeter of the pass, spending her decades in the exact same stone kitchen, welcoming the constant flow of strangers, without ever asking their names or their destinations. Beside her cooking pit lay her primary tool of discipline, a thick piece of coarse, dark charcoal shale, its rough texture worn down to a flat, heavy curve from years of being scraped against the bottom of iron pots. The shale was simple, unadorned, and permanently blackened by the carbon of 1,000 separate fires, yet it remained completely solid through every season. One evening, a fierce autumn blizzard swept over the ridge without warning, trapping a dozen exhausted travelers inside the narrow perimeter of the stone shelter. The room was noisy, packed with frantic energy as people argued over the remaining firewood, their diverse accents creating a dense wall of collective anxiety. Saki sat in the darkest corner, her teeth chattering from the damp chill, feeling a deep surge of her familiar, paralyzing isolation as she watched the strangers protect their separate bundles. She felt the heavy urge to gather her things and push out into the dangerous storm, believing that a lonely death on the trail was better than sitting in a room where she felt entirely invisible. She looked at the old cook and wondered how anyone could remain peaceful while surrounded by a chaotic, constantly shifting tide of rootless people. The old woman did not join the argument over the firewood, nor did she try to calm the rising panic by force. She sat cross-legged beside the primary iron cauldron, took the thick piece of charcoal shale into her bare palm, and began to scrape the exterior base of a soot-crusted kettle with a slow, steady, rhythmic motion. The dry, grating sound of the shale against the metal moved through the small room like a heavy pendulum, cutting through the sharp voices of the travelers. Chiyo did not rush her movements, and she did not look up when a guest accidentally knocked over a wooden water ladle near her knee. She simply breathed in the sharp scent of the cold ash, letting her hand follow the stable density of the stone, entirely present within the small patch of floor beneath her frame. The wandering trader watched the old cook from the shadow, her fingers gradually loosening their grip on her canvas pack as the steady rhythm of the stone filled the space. A quiet, profound realization began to surface through her exhaustion. The transformation did not arrive as a sudden burst of joy or a magical clearing of her heavy history. It was a much smaller, internal shift in how she related to the instability of the past. She saw that she had been treating the lack of a permanent home as an absolute proof of her internal exile, completely unaware that the old cook's stability lived in her capacity to hold her center exactly where her feet met the ground. Saki took a long, unhurried breath, letting the smell of the pine smoke settle into the bottom of her chest before she spoke. For the first time in many seasons, she did not look toward the door to calculate the distance. To the next province she stood up, walked slowly through the crowded room, and picked up a heavy wooden bucket to fetch water from the corner cistern for a family of wet travelers who had just entered from the storm. She did not pretend that her loneliness had vanished, and she did not try to force a warm intimacy with the strangers around her. Instead, she simply chose one small act of quiet discipline, sitting down on the cold bench with the uncertainty of the mountain blizzard, and stopping the old habit of treating her rootless thoughts as absolute truth. She remained steady with the texture of the immediate room, finding her home not in a physical coordinate, but in the unmoving space that allowed the travelers to arrive and depart. The true strength of the oak taproot manifests only when the surface soil is completely frozen, leaving the core center to hold its place within the deep bedrock of the mountain. The deep emotional patterns that exhaust us at night are often born from a fundamental misunderstanding of how internal balance operates. When we lie awake in the dark, the mind frequently engages in a frantic effort to manage the past, attempting to fix historic junctions that have long since set in the stone of reality. We employ an inner mechanism of hypervigilance, treating the existence of our unchosen path as an emergency that must be solved before we are allowed to rest. This constant surveying of our memories is a hidden attempt to manufacture safety out of absolute certainty. We mistakenly believe that if we can perform perfectly enough in our thoughts, we can avoid the discomfort of our current limits entirely. We begin to look at our actual, unadorned life as a kind of punishment, using internal shame to chide the heart whenever it wishes to simply occupy its own ground. Buddhist wisdom looks at this internal friction and offers a clear, liberating perspective on human discomfort. There is a fundamental distinction between the weight that naturally belongs to an event and the extra weight we manufacture through our resistance to the present. The initial friction of a difficult outcome or a lost opportunity is like the natural texture of raw flax, coarse and unrefined to the touch. The real suffering begins when we try to pull the threads apart with our thoughts, attempting to force our awareness completely into an imagined timeline, so that no presence remains for the life we actually have. We turn a normal turn of events into a deep personal fracture by treating every unchosen fork as a direct proof of our unworthiness. True peace does not come from erasing the difficult seasons from our personal history, but from changing how we hold our balance when the scales begin to move. Consider the physics of a simple iron cauldron resting over a mountain hearth. The metal container does not protect its contents by trying to alter the temperature of the surrounding blizzard. If the iron were constantly changing its shape to match the moving winds outside, the vessel would warp, causing the water inside to spill into the ashes. The cauldron remains functional, precisely because it maintains its own independent density, letting the storm pass around its heavy frame without becoming a permanent part of the interior space. When we refuse to allow our current reality to be exactly what it is, we are acting like a thin leaf caught in the draft, spinning with the weather and wondering why our spirit feels so strained. To alter your relationship with this emotional tension is to realize that a transition is not a definition of your limits, but a form of historical clarity. You do not need to convert every missed destination into a debt that must be paid by your nervous system until morning, the move occurred. But your habit of over-rehearsing creates a continuous echo that strains the chest. By standing firmly within the clean perimeter of your current frame, you allow the phantom timelines to drop away without leaving a mark on your value. The structural integrity of your life does not require you to balance the ghost weights of an alternate province. Bringing this architecture down into the small, practical exchanges of tomorrow completely alters the physics of your awareness. It allows you to meet the demands of the modern world with an unshakable sense of place, knowing that your ultimate responsibility is to preserve the space where your own presence can breathe. The pattern of converting an old relocation into a permanent identity is a defense mechanism developed by an exhausted intellect. We weave the story of our rootlessness so tightly into our daily interactions that the narrative itself becomes a heavy garment we refuse to take off, even when the ambient environment is perfectly safe. We begin to fear the very idea of a quiet, unmoving center, believing that if we stop guarding the old instability, we will instantly be swept away by the next change. Yet the teaching of the taproot shows that the true protection of the heart is not its isolation or its hardness, but its capacity to remain connected to the deep stone. You are not the journey that took place between the provinces, nor are you the judgment of those who could not understand your value. You are the continuous, open awareness that contains both the movement of the branches and the stillness of the root. If it feels right, let your attention expand past the narrow boundary of the immediate problem you have been trying to solve since dusk. You might notice how the darkness does not ask you to provide a certificate of permanent residency before it allows the nervous system to settle. The space in your room is completely empty of accusations, holding your physical weight with a steady, unblinking presence that asks for no defense. Let the need to be vindicated by the past drop away into the shadows of the floorboards, leaving you completely clear, unshared, and grounded in the quiet reality of this sleeping frame. This internal architecture of the unmoving bedrock lands with a grounding clarity when you find yourself sitting in the modern glare of a glowing digital display, watching for a specific text notification that refuses to arrive. You might notice the hand moving automatically to grasp the device, refreshing the screen for reassurance like a traveler frantically trying to hold down the flying gravel with an open palm, instead of letting the storm pass. We spend our afternoons smiling through modern conversations while carrying a deep, heavy depletion in the gut, pretending that our personal landscape is completely stable and untouched by change. When the late night finally arrives, we lie down under the weight of an invisible timeline, comparing our slow, quiet progress with the loud, curated milestones of peers we have never actually met. The internal critic begins to declare that you have fallen behind the group, spinning a long narrative that demands you earn the right to exist through a constant optimization of your choices. The actual implementation of this wisdom does not require a sudden departure to a high planting clearing, as it unfolds within the small, ordinary breaks of a chaotic afternoon. It begins when you allow a single second of physical stillness to exist between a sudden change in your environment and the voice that rises up to defend your history. When a wave of anxiety arrives to tell you that you must fix a circumstance you cannot control, you can notice the pattern without immediately reshaping your entire day to absorb the impact. You can care deeply about the individuals in your immediate circle without attempting to clamp down tightly on the exact path of their lives. Resting is not a special reward that must be purchased with an unblemished record of perfection, as the body is permitted to settle into the frame simply because the sun has dropped below the hill. We often treat our internal feelings of guilt as a strict blueprint, running to adjust our posture the moment a critical thought echoes through the chest. A more resilient way is to let the memory of the transition pass through the open spaces of your awareness without deciding that the current frame has suffered a fatal failure. You might observe the thought, feel its coarse flax texture against your mind, and then choose to leave it sitting separate from your sense of worth. This is the practical art of modern self-contained living. An unhurried decision to stop filling the healthy intervals of your days with the fragile mortar of phantom locations. You can allow the open gaps in your history to remain completely empty, letting the wind pass clean through without declaring the core center broken beyond repair. And now, the external world can finally recede behind the clean, dry stones of your own secure sanctuary. The dark room around you requires no performance, no adjustments, and no explanations for the clear direction your spirit has chosen to draw tonight. The modern world may continue to demand a smooth, unblemished presentation, but the night recognizes the profound beauty of your weathered edges. By ceasing the frantic effort to polish away your history, you allow the deep lines of your experiences to hold the frame together without tension. You are left entirely with your own essential presence, a solid and uncomplicated form that needs no external validation to be whole. Let the need to be verified by others slide away into the shadows of the floorboards, leaving your personal space completely clear, unshared, and at peace. Your breathing continues its slow, unsteered movement, a calm tide that honors the natural boundaries of the body without any interference from the conscious mind. It enters as a cool guest, fills the interior chambers with a steady presence, and then departs completely, leaving no lingering attachment behind. If it feels right, allow your consciousness to match this fluid process, letting the memories of the day's interactions pass out through the perimeter of your awareness without trying to hold their outlines. The people you met, the tasks you completed, and the words you spoke have all found their own places in the landscape of the past, requiring no further editing from your tired thoughts. The night has officially closed the ledger of your interactions, drawing a clear, dark line between the duties of the sun and the sanctuary of the midnight hour. The dark coordinates of the room have dissolved into a deep, unmeasured shadow, softening every boundary until the space around you feels vast and clear. Let the surface beneath you receive the full density of your frame tonight, as your limbs grow heavy and the center of your gravity settles firmly into the quiet mattress. The mind has no further structures to build and no further alignments to measure before the morning light touches the valley village. The heavy bronze dibble bar has been laid aside in the high clearing, dark and still, requiring no further verification from your fingers. With each slow movement of your chest, the air passes softly through the throat, returning to the open dark without any deliberate effort from your frame. The mountain wind outside has turned into a quiet whisper, passing cleanly through the cedar trees without meeting any resistance. You can feel the breath becoming a natural, unowned tide, a gentle rising and falling that requires no steering from your will. It is the simple weight of the universe itself, resting securely within the parameters of the evening. Every solid block of your history is settling deep into the dark earth, leaving your hands empty and your posture light, resting softly against the fabric of the night. You do not need to figure out how to arrange the pieces of tomorrow, and you do not need to dissolve your edges to maintain the peace of the world. The darkness itself is your sanctuary, a place where the chosen steps and the unchosen trails are held with the exact same unyielding support. Let the final images of the high clearing and the trailside hearth fade away into the featureless blackness of sleep. The charcoal shale is resting, the tools are laid down, and the core taproot stands perfectly set on its own center, without demanding to be smoothed away. You are returning to the deep, unblended home of your own individual presence, a space that was never compromised, never eroded, and never lost. The night is wide, the room is still, and you are completely free to leave the world outside your perimeter. Let your awareness slide effortlessly into the dark, warm currents of rest, drifting deeper and deeper into the uncomplicated peace of an undisturbed sleep. The silence that fills these openings does not weaken your foundation, as it provides the very room required for the spirit to adjust its weight without friction. We spend our days running from the spaces between things, rushing to plug every silence with a modern justification or an anxious performance. Yet the deep architecture of the night reveals that the spaces are not empty voids waiting to be feared, but natural intervals of pure restoration. The mind does not need to cement itself to every passing expectation to be valuable, for a seed is perfectly complete simply by resting on the ground where it fell. Let the heavy demand for continuous adaptation slip away into the shadows of the floorboards, leaving your personal space completely clear, unshared, and at peace. Your breathing continues its slow, unsteered movement, a calm tide that honors the natural boundaries of the body, without any interference from the conscious mind. It enters as a cool guest, fills the interior chambers with a steady presence, and then departs completely, leaving no lingering attachment behind. If it feels right, allow your consciousness to match this fluid process, letting the memories of the day's interactions pass out through the perimeter of your awareness, without trying to hold their outlines. The people you met, the tasks you completed, and the words you spoke have all found their own places in the landscape of the past, requiring no further editing from your tired thoughts. The night has officially closed the ledger of your interactions, drawing a clear, dark line between the duties of the sun and the sanctuary of the midnight hour. We often function under the heavy misconception that to be compassionate, we must allow our own ground to be entirely flooded by the challenges of others. We become like the low valley fields during a heavy seasonal downpour, absorbing every drop of water until the soil turns to mud and can no longer support the roots of the trees. The wisdom of the balance scale reminds us that true support is an act of solid alignment, not an act of dissolving. By remaining steady within the clear parameters of your own physical form, you offer the world a reliable anchor rather than a collapsing surface. You do not need to feel guilty for keeping your edges dry, for it is only from a position of stable ground that a hand can ever be safely extended to another. Let the weight of your head sink a fraction deeper into the fabric beneath it, allowing the remaining tightness in the neck and upper back to completely unwind. The long muscles of the limbs are growing heavier with every passing breath, surrendering their posture to the absolute security of the bed. Every point where your body meets the surface below is a clean boundary, a physical reminder that you are a distinct, precious form resting safely within your own territory. The space outside your walls belongs entirely to the night, and you have no obligation to police its winds or manage its changing temperatures. The world is fully capable of spinning through the dark without your vigilant watch, holding its communities and its valleys in a state of unhurried balance while you rest. The modern anxieties that felt so solid during the afternoon, the unresolved messages, the comparisons, the persistent fear of falling behind, are now revealed to be nothing more than light chaff floating through the market shed. They possess no independent power to crack your foundation. and they only become heavy when you try to grasp them and hold them against your chest. Let the stream of your awareness move with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, allowing all the unnecessary debris of the day to fall through the open grid onto the earth below. The clean, heavy seeds of your true being remain safely inside the frame, untouched by the dust that passes through the weave. You are left entirely with your own essential presence, a solid and uncomplicated form that needs no external validation to be whole. The quietness of this hour is a total sanctuary of non-doing, a vast and peaceful expanse where the passage of minutes has lost its sharp necessity. The sunrise is still a distant reality, hidden behind the dark rim of the northern ridge, leaving these hours exclusively for the recovery of your spirit. There is no problem that must be solved before your eyes can close, and there is no relationship that must be perfectly aligned before you are permitted to drift away. You are free to let the tools drop from your hands, to let the iron kettle rest on the table, and to allow your consciousness to sink into the deep, dark spaces between the moments. Allow the final remnants of intentional thought to thin out like the last traces of smoke from an outdoor hearth dissolving into the midnight air. The air is still, the valley is silent, and the ancient trunk stands perfectly balanced on its own center, enduring the cold without a single drop of hesitation. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of social obligation, past the need for language, and past the boundaries of the historical self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound density of the resting frame, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing current of the evening. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep. If the mountain stone underneath holds every valley together, could it be that you have already arrived at the only destination that ever mattered? The bedrock beneath the floorboards remains completely indifferent to the miles you have traveled, offering its ancient, unbroken density to support your physical weight without demanding that you define your place in the world. The mind has spent so many hours acting as an anxious gatekeeper, checking every boundary and measuring the distance between where you are and where you think you should be. Yet the deep stillness of this midnight hour reveals that the true nature of your existence is not a problem to be solved or a timeline to be corrected. In this spacious valley of rest, there is no requirement for you to justify the path that brought you to this bed, nor is there any demand to balance the scales of your life before the sun rises. The night accepts your presence with a complete, unhurried ease, allowing the chosen steps and the unchosen paths to dissolve into the exact same supportive shadow. Observe how the cool evening air settles into the lungs, moving smoothly without your active direction, filling the body like the slow accumulation of winter rain within a quiet stone basin. The water does not ask how many channels it passed through to reach its destination, nor does it calculate the value of the fields it left behind on the high slopes. It simply rests, dark, cool, and perfectly content with its own fluid volume. If it feels right, allow your awareness to match this uncalculated existence, dropping the subtle internal strain of trying to fix a historic junction that has already set into the past. The day has officially run its course, and the instruments of measurement have been laid aside on the grass, leaving you with absolutely nothing to complete, nothing to verify, and nothing to prove to the quiet room around you. The thoughts that once felt like heavy oak slabs blocking the flow of your peace are now losing their density, drifting away like light willow seeds carried off by a slow valley breeze. They possess no weight of their own, no power to command your immediate attention, and no capacity to disturb the deep grounding that has settled into your physical frame. You can feel the heavy, comfortable density of your arms, the complete relaxation of the shoulders, and the soft opening of the hands as they rest against the fabric of the bed. Every point of contact between your body and the mattress is a direct message from the earth, reminding you that your immediate perimeter is safe, your form is fully supported, and you are allowed to drop the heavy armor of vigilance you have carried since the dawn. We often live under the persistent illusion that our inner freedom must be purchased through a series of flawless decisions, believing that we can only find peace once every memory has been perfectly polished. Yet the true architecture of the spirit is like the ancient root that finds its utility not in remaining above the surface, but in its capacity to let the current pass without losing its essential purity. Your true nature is not the collection of regrets, comparisons, or social anxieties that the mind keeps trying to arrange in the dark. You are the vast, silent space in which those elements briefly surface and quietly recede, completely untouched by the narratives they attempt to construct. The branch may turn down the western slope, but it remains part of the same tree, cool and steady and entirely whole. Let this understanding sink deep into the core of your frame, operating not as a complex doctrine to be analyzed, but as a warm, heavy blanket that invites your entire being to soften. There is no need to hold on to these insights, no need to remember these sentences, and no need to maintain any focus as the night deepens. The spoken cadences are simply markers along the edge of your room, a passing wind through the courtyard grasses that does not ask to be captured or evaluated by a tired mind. You can permit the words to blur into a formless murmur, a soothing rhythm that gently nudges your consciousness further down into the warm, dark currents of deep rest. The room around you has become an absolute sanctuary of non-doing, a space where the passage of time has lost its sharp necessity and its constant demands. The morning is far away, resting behind a horizon that has not yet begun to change, leaving these hours exclusively for the profound restoration of your spirit. You do not need to solve the riddle of your history tonight, and you do not need to ensure that every choice has been perfectly vindicated before your eyes close. The universe is fully capable of maintaining its balance without your active participation, holding the mountains, the terraces, and the quiet trading outposts in a state of effortless equilibrium while you sleep. Allow the final remnants of intentional thought to drift away like the last thin wisps of evening mist dissolving over the surface of a still mountain lake. The water is flat, the sky is dark, and the reflection of the stars requires no effort to remain perfectly clear. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of memory, past the need for language, and past the boundaries of the historical self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound heaviness of the limbs, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing sanctuary of the midnight hour. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep. The deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep filters down into the marrow of your bones, filling every corner of your physical frame with a quiet density that asks for no validation from the modern world. The mind has spent so many days acting as a restless surveyor, plotting the distance between the provinces you left behind and the places you have yet to build. Yet the vast architecture of the midnight hour reveals that your essential safety does not depend on an unchanging external landscape. The transitions, the temporary rooms, and the long roads were merely the natural movements of a changing world, passing across your awareness like high clouds floating over the summit of the mountain ridge. In this quiet sanctuary of rest, there is no requirement for you to explain the trajectory of your life, and there is no obligation to balance the scales of your human connections before the body is allowed to drift away into the healing shadow. Observe how the cool evening air claims its own space within the lungs, moving smoothly without your active direction, filling the chest like the slow rising of groundwater within an ancient stone well. The liquid does not ask how many channels it passed through to reach the valley floor, nor does it calculate the precise dimensions of the hollow paths it left behind on the high slopes. It is simply present, cool, steady, and perfectly content with its own fluid volume. If it feels right, allow your awareness to match this uncalculated existence, dropping the subtle internal tension of trying to reach a perfect destination before the morning arrives. The day has officially run its course, and the tools of evaluation are laid aside on the floorboards, leaving you with absolutely nothing to complete, nothing to verify, and nothing to prove to the quiet room around you. The thoughts that once felt like heavy granite blocks pressing against your ribs are now losing their density, drifting away like dry cedar needles carried off by a slow valley wind. They possess no weight of their own, no power to command your obedience, and no capacity to disturb the deep grounding that has settled into your physical frame. You can feel the heavy, comfortable density of your legs, the complete relaxation of the lower back, and the soft opening of the palms as they rest against the fabric of the bed. Every point where your body meets the surface below is a clean boundary, a physical reminder from the earth that your perimeter is secure, your form is supported, and you are allowed to drop the heavy armor of vigilance you have carried since the morning. We often live under the persistent illusion that our inner peace must be earned through a series of successful permanent settlements, believing that we can only rest once every human connection has been perfectly cemented. Yet the wisdom of the thick charcoal shale points to a far more profound freedom, the realization that the movement of the trail is the very condition that allows the spirit to discover its unmoving ground. Your true nature is not the collection of expectations, comparisons, or social anxieties that the mind keeps trying to arrange in the dark. You are the vast, silent space in which those elements briefly surface and quietly recede, completely untouched by the narratives they attempt to weave. The wind may howl through the mountain pass, but it can never alter the essential quality of the stone underneath. Let this understanding sink deep into the core of your frame, operating not as a complex philosophy to be analyzed, but as a warm, heavy blanket that invites your entire being to soften. There is no need to hold on to these insights, no need to remember these sentences, and no need to maintain any focus as the night deepens. The spoken cadences are simply markers along the edge of your room, a passing wind through the courtyard grasses that does not ask to be captured or evaluated by a tired mind. You can permit the words to blur into a formless murmur, a soothing rhythm that gently nudges your consciousness further down into the warm, dark currents of deep rest. The room around you has become an absolute sanctuary of non-doing, a space where the passage of time has lost its sharp necessity and its constant demands. The morning is far away, resting behind a horizon that has not yet begun to change, leaving these hours exclusively for the profound restoration of your spirit. You do not need to solve the riddle of your history tonight, and you do not need to ensure that every choice has been perfectly vindicated before your eyes close. The universe is fully capable of maintaining its balance without your active participation, holding the mountains, the rivers, and the quiet trailside shelters in a state of effortless equilibrium while you sleep. Allow the final remnants of intentional thought to drift away like the last thin wisps of evening mist, dissolving over the surface of a still mountain lake. The water is flat, the sky is dark, and the reflection of the stars requires no effort to remain perfectly clear. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of memory, past the need for language, and past the boundaries of the historical self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound heaviness of the limbs, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing sanctuary of the midnight hour. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep. The quietness of this undisturbed sleep expands its territory through the dark room, washing over the remaining edges of your thoughts until the need to calculate your position in the world completely disappears. The mind has spent so many seasons acting as a frantic surveyor, checking the seams of your history for any sign of structural instability. Yet the vast expanse of the night reveals that an open space is the ultimate sanctuary. In this quiet architecture of the heart, there is no quota of performance that must be met before you are permitted to completely vanish into the stillness. The night does not audit the length of your resting hours, nor does it demand that your journey toward inner freedom be justified by a specific address or a permanent location. It simply stands wide open, a dark and supportive reservoir of calm that accepts your presence with the exact same unconditional embrace, whether you feel settled or transient. Observe how the cool mountain air claims its own territory within the lungs, moving smoothly without your active steering, filling the chest like the slow rising of groundwater within an ancient stone well. The liquid does not ask how many channels it passed through to reach the basin, nor does it calculate the precise dimensions of the hollow paths it left behind on the high slopes. It is simply present, cool, steady, and perfectly at peace with its own volume. If it feels right, allow your awareness to match this uncalculated existence, dropping the subtle internal tension of trying to reach an external destination before the dawn arrives. The day has run its course, and the tools of interaction are laid down, leaving you with absolutely nothing to complete, nothing to verify, and nothing to prove to the quiet space around you. The thoughts that once felt like heavy stone blocks pressing against your ribs are now losing their density, drifting away like dry cedar needles carried off by a slow valley wind. They possess no weight of their own, no power to command your obedience, and no capacity to disturb the deep grounding that has settled into your physical frame. You can feel the heavy, comfortable density of your legs, the complete relaxation of the lower back, and the soft opening of the palms as they rest against the fabric of the bed. Every point where your body meets the surface below is a direct message from the earth, reminding you that your perimeter is secure, your form is supported, and you are allowed to drop the heavy armor of vigilance you have carried since the morning. We often live under the persistent illusion that our inner peace must be earned through a series of successful completions, believing that we can only rest once every human connection has been perfectly cemented. Yet the wisdom of the thick charcoal shale points to a far more profound freedom, the realization that the paths are the very condition that allows the spirit to discover its unmoving ground. Your true nature is not the collection of expectations, comparisons, or social anxieties that the mind keeps trying to arrange in the dark. You are the vast, silent space in which those elements briefly arise and quietly fade away, completely untouched by the narratives they attempt to weave. The wind may whistle through the terraces, but it can never alter the essential quality of the bedrock itself. Let this understanding sink deep into the marrow of your bones, operating not as a complex philosophy to be analyzed, but as a warm, heavy blanket that invites your entire being to soften. There is no need to hold on to this teaching, no need to remember these sentences, and no need to maintain any focus as the night deepens. The spoken cadences are simply markers along the perimeter of your room, a passing wind through the courtyard grasses that does not ask to be captured or analyzed by a tired mind. You can permit the words to blur into a formless murmur, a soothing rhythm that gently nudges your consciousness further down into the warm, dark currents of deep rest. The room around you has become an absolute sanctuary of non-doing, a space where the passage of time has lost its sharp edges and its constant demands. The morning is far away, resting behind a horizon that has not yet begun to turn, leaving these hours entirely dedicated to the profound restoration of your spirit. You do not need to solve the riddle of your life tonight, and you do not need to ensure that every boundary has been perfectly understood before your eyes close. The universe is fully capable of maintaining its balance without your active participation, holding the mountains, the rivers, and the quiet trailside shelters in a state of effortless equilibrium while you sleep. Allow the final remnants of intentional thought to drift away like the last thin wisps of evening mist dissolving over the surface of a still mountain lake. The water is flat, the sky is dark, and the reflection of the stars requires no effort to remain perfectly clear. You are sinking deeper now, moving past the realm of memory, past the need for language, and past the boundaries of the historical self. There is only this immediate, unhurried breath, this profound heaviness of the limbs, and this complete surrender to the dark, healing sanctuary of the midnight hour. Let the quiet darkness carry you all the way down into the deep, unmeasured peace of an undisturbed sleep.